Extras. Way back in the aftermath of the battle with Mordeval, Black miraculously survived wounds which should have been fatal, given that we have since then reduced our house-ruled negative hit point death cushion. Who knows what feverish visions envelop one so near to death, but as he was rousing, he saw some kind of bird silhouetted above him. As it passed, he realized it was not clothed in feathers, but instead sported wings of bare bone. And then he woke. It was left out of the videos, but as they were passing through Castle and following up a few little details left over from before their journey to the Feywild, Black was standing on the stairs outside the palace when a very real skeletal raven flew up and landed on his very surprised shoulder. Black's usually pretty quick to smash undead, but this was so incongruous that he didn't know how to react, and during that window of indecision, with this avian member of the choir invisible on his shoulder, Mahar ran up to him.
Zahir sent that out more than a week ago. Zahir had skeleton birds? He had that one.
It's unclear how a run-of-the-mill animated skeleton was able to fly without additional magic or, feathers. But the undead raven made for a very quick messenger since it could fly 24 hours a day without need for rest. Zahir had sent the ex-raven to the lighthouse/temple on the west coast of Vistria run by Maya, a fairly senior member of the small priesthood of Anku, the so-called shepherds. It was a little eerie reading the reply, given the original message was sent before Zahir's mysterious disappearance, and has no obvious connection to his kidnapping, if that's what it was. He had been asking Maya about rumors of an old priest of their order running around in the Shadowfell, opposing the powerful vampire kings. Her message actually confirmed that Rygax, the mythical hero Black's father always told him about as a child, the one none of the other children had heard of, was, or at least had been, a powerful priest of Anku, who had a major part in the fall of Vladimir, a vampire king who had actually been destroyed. However, Maya said they'd had no contact with Rygax for at least 100 years. If he wasn't dead, he seemed to have gone into hiding. It was hard to be sure, though. With Tobin's help, Black had been looking into his childhood hero last time they were at the Basilica, trying to confirm whether or not he was real. And they were pretty sure that he was, but the hand's information was even less recent than that of the shepherds. Tobin said that Rygax had definitely been active for well over a century, meaning he was probably not human, but a longer-lived race. Some rumored him to be an elf or a half-elf. There were even theories that he was an ancient warforged who had become trapped in a tomb or buried during the Dead Wars, when the Ataran forces had counterattacked the Vampire Kings, and that he had been reactivated 3 or 4 centuries ago when that tomb was breached, only to resume the war all on his own. Draven chose to believe that theory, because it sounded awesome. Maya's letter didn't answer that question, but it made Black wonder yet again what the connection was between the legendary vampire hunter and his father, or his father's disappearance years ago. This whole mini-dungeon, for whatever reason, was like being attacked by Monster Manual 4, with varying degrees of modification. In addition to the Lodestone Marauder, the magnetic monster on the upper level, the riders were also all right out of MM4. The Ghost Dwarf used the rules for a whispering demon. It's incorporeal, and I like the confusion mechanic because it has a fairly hard DC, hit everyone in the area, but unlike so many save or suck powers, it lasts only 1 round, but it can keep trying and trying, which is much more interesting for everyone than either passing one save and becoming immune, or failing one save and being feared or paralyzed for the entire fight. I actually missed the fact that the Whispering Demon can't successfully confuse you for 2 rounds in a row, but In practice, it didn't make a difference since Little One rolled act normally the second round. I did obviously change his type from outsider to undead, and I gave the ghost +2 damage on his incorporeal touch attack because I figured the spell damage bonus of the magic shield should count for that. And I made that shit up anyway. In life, Don Mazur was the heir to the last lord of the dwarfhold of Egregor. He never inherited anything, because Egregor was one of the 2 dwarfholds lost during the Shadow War, not to orcs, but to strange horrors from below. He must have been pretty bitter and paranoid by the end to have risen in this form. Zora, the stone warrior who turned out to be Drow, was essentially the Kragoran giant from Monster Manual 4. She was only large instead of huge, and her stats may have been tweaked a little bit, but that's why she had the Spiked Stones ability. As the spirit suggested, Swain had been in conflict with the Drow on a number of occasions, but Zora must have done something that impressed him, or otherwise convinced him to recruit her rather than slaughtering her like the others. She was far from unattractive, but clearly she didn't see it that way, and when he offered her power, he had appealed to her desire to change her appearance, and probably a desire for revenge against some of her fellow Drow who had schemed against her or kept her down. As for Face Crusher, the massive charging guy was another demon from the same book, a Castigar. The only thing I really changed is to give him a helm which basically has the same power as that Rhino armor from the DMG, except that it's attached to a head slot instead of a suit of crappy studded leather armor. Of course, plus 2d6 damage on charging is a lot of fun when the monster already does massive charge damage and stunning and junk. This means his swift action leaps were really just more of a physical reinterpretation of the Castigar demon's quickened dimension slide power. Either way, it's used to get far enough away for a charge attack without taking attacks of opportunity. Where Face Crusher came from is an open question. Maybe he was some rare horror from the depths of the Underdark, or from the slave pits of the Neogi, but if he was an actual demon, that would be much more concerning, since the barriers between this world and Hell are far more rigid than in most D&D settings. People have a lot of questions about spirit shackles, and I answered about as much as I can in the comments, but here's what I can tell you. A so-called spirit shackle is a ritual which is only known to be performed by the Vampire Kings, and it binds the spirit to a location, traps it in some kind of object. Not all spirits seem to be susceptible for shackling. Some are too slippery or mobile, but it may be more that only some spirits can provide worthwhile powers, or perhaps any powers at all, through the shackling process. Once a spirit is thus bound, the creator of the shackle can take the spirit's power for their own, or can gift it to an individual present at the site. Once granted, these powers seem to be permanent until the recipient dies, the shackle is destroyed, or possibly until the creator of the shackle gives the power to someone else. If that were the case, it would help to explain why the vampire's so-called lieutenants are so completely loyal. If they were to betray their king for one of the others, they might gain new powers in the bargain, but they'd soon be stripped of their old ones. The reason the Vampire Kings are considered so insanely powerful is that they have each accumulated many spirit shackles, and have granted as many powers as they can to themselves. The lieutenants only get what is left over, powers that would be redundant, or ones which cannot be used by the Vampire King for other reasons, such as an ability which only works for the living. As far as what kind of powers you get from all this, well, it's tremendously varied. There seem to be no rules whatsoever. The type of power a spirit grants through the shackle has little, if any, connection to the spirit's own normal capabilities. A spirit that is powerful in combat might grant a strange movement or divination ability, while a seemingly minor spirit might grant an insanely powerful combat buff, or the ability to unleash a devastating spell-like ability. There may be some vague connection between the immortal being's nature and the nature of its abilities, like how Benzegagoth allows for control of a massive and powerful creature of shadow, and he's um, tar thing. Yeah, mortal logic doesn't seem to apply. It's hard to tell how powerful the Rajas are overall. They certainly make it seem like they are powerful players, but we haven't seen them actually do much themselves. Are there only the four of them? What other allies do they have? The party knows hardly anything about all that, but they have by now provided enough evidence to affirm one thing. In terms of divination, magic that gathers information, they have proven themselves extremely capable. Even if you ignore their predictions of things which haven't happened yet, and all their fancy fate matrix and other obfuscating talk, they appear to communicate effortlessly across planes and continents. They did instantly recognize the astral plague, they predicted the presence of these riders at this particular time, and Lady Hazamura was able to arrive in time to help them defeat Mortival, not to mention knowing how to unravel his protections. But this burst divinations thing is on a whole other level. Divinations tend to take a lot of time. Many of them take a minute, 10 minutes, even an hour to cast, plus minutes more to watch or listen to an area, ask questions of a wise spirit or deity, etc. Even knowing when the PCs would break the shackle, creating a disruption in Swain's anti-divination network, they could probably only get off one divination each, two at most, and even then, they'd be relying on the quick ones, not necessarily the best, most powerful, in-depth divinations for the information they seek. What the Rajas have devised is a combination of several techniques. They have a means of accelerating the casting and watching parts of their divinations by making a trade-off. Their specialized form of quick and meta magic lets them cast divination spells in only 1 or 2 rounds. The cost is that the information gathered in that instant comes in a form which is not usable. Effectively, the information is compressed, tied up in riddles, metaphor, and cryptic messages, or locked in labyrinthine magical structures. Deciphering this information requires far longer than it would have taken to simply cast the spell normally, as much as 10 times longer. But then, because the cast time is down to 1 round, they were able to incorporate these spells into another insane form of metamagic, not normally available, to chain multiple divinations into a single spell cast, much like those cheesy Baldur's Gate spells that let you spend a higher level slot to cast multiple lower level spells all at once, while still costing those lower level slots. So, for example, one of the prototypical divination spells, Scrying, takes an hour to cast, after which it allows you to observe what happens in a remote area for 1 minute per caster level. But when Lord Kintomazu is burst divining, he could cast a spell sequencer that would blast out 3 scrying spells in 1 round. At that point in time, he'd see nothing of the scryed areas. The information has to be stored in temporary glyphs or locked away in pockets of the caster's own memory. To actually get that information could take him as long as 30 hours, depending on his skills, to see each target for 1 minute per caster level. Though that example assumes that they are using the same spell lists that you get from the player's handbook or the expanded psionics handbook. In practice, many of the Raj's divinations work in a very different manner. Of course, as impressive as all that is, how often do you need to cast all your divinations in a short window, yet you can afford to spend the extra time to analyze the data afterward? That's some pretty specialized stuff. And no, they can't spell sequence or triple fireballs or disintegrates or whatever. Just divinations. It certainly hints at other capabilities. Only hints, though. But that's the thing. The small cabal of Rakshasas who now call themselves Rajas were founded not by a great conqueror or politician, but by a Rakshasa who discovered a mystery, a phenomenon she couldn't explain. And she was overwhelmed by curiosity, bending all of her Rakshasa cunning and intellect to uncovering the mechanisms of that mystery, and eventually to trying to understand underlying truths about all reality. Where most Rakshasas use their intelligence to scheme, deceive, to boost their own power, prestige, and pride at the expense of others, this one researcher, and the very few whom she inducted, intrigued by her findings, who came to call themselves the Rajas, she and they devoted themselves to uncovering knowledge and using that to further goals that their petty, throat-slitting cousins would never understand. If you've listened this far and want to keep up with any funny or interesting junk I post, make sure to follow me on demonac.tumblr.com, on facebook.com/demonacagc, or on Twitter at TailsDDC. If you want to join the dozens of greatly appreciated patrons in supporting my channel directly, you can chip in at patreon.com/demonac. Every contribution is appreciated, but if you donate even $1 per month, you can download an MP3 of the Vampire King theme, the main battle music from the fight with Mortival, just as a little thank you. Of course, one of the best and cheapest ways you can help out is to share TDDC and the new mini-tales with any gamer or non-gamer friends who you think might enjoy them. And don't forget to like these videos.